Now to an incredible find overseas, an elaborate series of stone monuments believed to have been hidden for thousands of years, not far from the famous site of Stonehenge.
Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland.
Salisbury Plain does not look like a place that should keep secret, is flat, open, and swept by wind that never seems to stop moving. You can see for miles in every direction, and yet the one thing standing on that plain has kept archaeologists arguing for 3 centuries. In late 2025, a team of researchers decided to stop arguing and start computing. They gathered every scan, every laser survey, every excavation report, every soil sample and radiocarbon date ever produced about Stonehenge, and they handed the entire archive to an artificial intelligence system trained to find patterns across enormous, messy datasets. What came back did not settle the argument. It reopened it. Before getting to what the AI found, it helps to remember what everyone already agreed on. Stonehenge sits roughly 80 miles southwest of London, built in stages across an almost unbelievable span of time, starting with a simple circular ditch and bank around 3000 BCE and continuing, on and off, for more than 1,000 years. The outer ring is made of sarsen stones, some weighing more than 20 tons, quarried from the westwards roughly 15 miles to the north. Inside that ring stand the smaller bluestones, some under 3 tons but still substantial, and those came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a journey of more than 150 miles. No wheels capable of carrying that load existed at the time. No draft animals were bred for it. And yet the stones arrived, were shaped, and were raised into a structure precise enough that, on the summer solstice, the sun still rises directly over the heel stone and casts its first light into the center of the circle, just as it has for 5,000 years. That solstice alignment is the one fact about Stonehenge that almost everyone knows. It is also, as it turns out, the least interesting thing the AI found. The research team fed the model a mountain of data it had never been asked to process all at once. 3-dimensional laser scans of every stone surface, tool mark studies, magnetometry readings from surrounding fields, centuries of excavation notes that had never been cross-referenced against each other, and a full geological catalog of every rock sample ever taken from the site. The instruction given to the model was intentionally broad. It was not told to confirm the solstice alignment or to look for anything specific. It was told to find whatever patterns existed in the combined dataset that no single research paper, written by a single team focused on a single question, could ever have surfaced. The first thing the model returned concerned the sarsen stones themselves, and it had nothing to do with astronomy. When the AI cross-referenced the tool mark data against the geological hardness readings for each individual stone, it found something that had been sitting in plain sight in scattered survey reports for decades without anyone connecting it. The dressing marks, the shallow, parallel grooves left by the pounding stones used to shape the sarsens, were not applied with uniform force across the monument. Instead, the depth and spacing of the tool marks varied in a way that tracked almost exactly with the density and grain structure of each individual stone. In other words, whoever shaped these stones was not using the same technique on all of them. They were adjusting their method, stone by stone, based on how that particular piece of rock behaved under the hammer. That sounds like a small thing until you think about what it requires. It means the builders had, at minimum, an intuitive understanding of material science specific to sarsen sandstone, knowing where a stone would flake cleanly and where it would shatter, and adjusting their approach before they ever struck it. Dr. Elena Marsh, a materials scientist brought in to review the AI's output, put it plainly in her assessment of the findings. Matching tool technique to stone grain at this level of consistency is something modern stonemasons still do by trial and feel, and seeing it appear as a measurable statistical pattern across nearly 80 separate sarsens was, in her words, not something she expected a purely computational analysis to surface, because it is the kind of knowledge normally passed down as craft, not written into a monument for someone to reconstruct 4,000 years later. That was the first surprise. The second one came from the ditch. The outer ditch that surrounds the monument has been excavated in sections since the 19th century, and every excavation produced a slightly different profile, different depths, different widths, different soil compositions, depending on where the dig happened to fall. For years, this variation was treated as noise, the natural result of different excavation teams using different methods at different times. The AI was given the complete set of ditch profile data, all of it, from every dig ever conducted around the perimeter, and asked simply to look for structure in the variation rather than assume it was random. It found a repeating pattern. The depth of the ditch does not decline randomly around the circle. It follows a wave that completes exactly 4 full cycles across the monument's circumference, and the points of maximum depth line up, within a small margin of error, with the 4 cardinal points of the compass, not the solstice alignments everyone already knew about, but true north, south, east, and west, oriented to magnetic conditions the AI calculated would have applied on Salisbury Plain roughly 5,000 years ago, when magnetic north sat in a noticeably different position than it does today. This detail matters because building a ditch that deepens at true cardinal points, adjusted for a magnetic field that no longer exists in that configuration, requires 2 things happening at once: an understanding of direction that goes beyond simply watching where the sun rises, and a willingness to bury a piece of scientific information nobody was necessarily meant to see. Since the ditch is the least visually prominent part of the entire complex, it is not a monument you would build to impress anyone. It reads more like a structure built to encode something quietly in a part of the site nobody was likely to study as closely as the standing stones themselves. From there, the analysis moved to the bluestones, and this is where things get harder to explain with the tools archaeology has traditionally used. The bluestones are not a single type of rock. They are a mixed group, mostly of volcanic rock, called spotted dolerite, but with several other rock types included as well, sourced from different specific outcrops across the Preseli Hills. For decades, researchers have debated why the builders bothered sourcing bluestones from multiple, sometimes distant, locations within the same general region, instead of just taking whatever was closest and easiest to move. The AI was given full petrographic data on every bluestone at the site, along with a complete geological survey of the Preseli outcrops, and asked to model the selection pattern. What it found was that the stones were not chosen primarily for size or ease of transport, which had always been the working assumption. They were chosen for internal density and crystalline structure, properties that, when the stone is struck, determine how it resonates. When the model built an acoustic simulation of the bluestone circle as it would have stood when complete, it found that the selected stones, placed in their excavated positions, produce a narrow band of consistent overtones when struck in sequence, an effect that a randomly selected set of bluestones of similar size does not reproduce. Dr. Aidan Cho, an acoustic physicist who reviewed the simulation, described the outcome carefully, noting that the interesting part was not that stone can ring, most dense rock rings if you hit hard enough, but that this particular selection of stones, out of everything available across an entire mountain range, converges on a narrow and repeatable set of tones instead of a scattered, arbitrary range, which is the kind of result you would expect from deliberate selection rather than convenience. He was careful to add that this does not prove intent on its own, but that the statistical unlikelihood of it happening by accident is high enough that it deserves serious follow-up. This is the point where the AI's analysis started connecting pieces that had previously been studied as entirely separate questions. The tool mark pattern showed material knowledge. The ditch depths showed directional knowledge tied to a magnetic field no longer in place. The bluestone selection showed acoustic knowledge. None of these had ever been considered together because they came from different subdisciplines within archaeology that rarely share raw data with each other. It took a system with no disciplinary boundaries and no attachment to any one theory to notice that all 3 point toward the same underlying picture, a group of people with a working, applied understanding of geology, orientation, and acoustics integrated into a single construction project executed over centuries. The timeline is where the findings become genuinely uncomfortable because it does not describe a steady climb toward mastery. When the AI ranked construction phases by precision, measuring how closely each stage matched the mathematical ideal implied by the patterns found in the earlier stages, it found that precision peaks early and degrades over time. The ditch's cardinal point wave pattern is cleanest in the earliest excavated sections, the ones associated with the earliest phase of construction around 3000 BCE. The bluestone acoustic clustering is tightest among the stones believed, based on soil stratigraphy, to have been placed first. And the tool mark matching between technique and stone grain, that intuitive material knowledge from the very beginning of this analysis, is strongest in the oldest sarsens and noticeably looser in stones added during later phases, some of which show mismatched technique on stone types that would have punished the wrong approach with visible flaking damage. Damage the AI found present in several later stones, and essentially absent in the earliest ones. Put simply, the people who started this project appear to have understood it better than the people who finished it. That is backwards from how we normally imagine ancient technological development, where knowledge accumulates generation over generation. Here, the evidence points toward a group that began with an unusually sophisticated grasp of geology, orientation, and acoustics, and gradually lost the ability to apply that knowledge with the same precision as time went on, even while continuing to follow the same overall plan for centuries. Dr. Reanalyzed, who studies long-term transmission of technical knowledge in preliterate societies, offered a framework for thinking about this that the research team found useful. She pointed out that this pattern, high initial precision followed by gradual decline, while the surface form of a tradition is still maintained, is well documented in other contexts, such as certain metallurgical techniques and textile patterns that degrade in complexity across generations, even as communities continue producing recognizable versions of the original object. In her assessment, what likely happened at Stonehenge is not evidence of forgotten superscience, but a realistic and well-documented process. A small group of specialists, perhaps just a handful of people, held detailed working knowledge, and as that knowledge passed hand to hand across generations without writing to anchor it, some of it was inevitably lost, while the broad outline of the project, build the ring here, source stones from there, survived because it was simple enough to remember by rote. Worth sitting with because it does not require inventing a lost civilization or an unexplained outside influence. It requires only that a small number of people at the very start of this project knew more about their environment than we have generally given Neolithic communities credit for, and that the ordinary universal process of that is a more grounded explanation than the mystery framing suggests, and is knowledge decay across unwritten generations did the rest. Still, the AI's landscape scale analysis adds a wrinkle that even that grounded explanation has trouble fully absorbing. When the model was given LiDAR survey data covering roughly 6 square miles around the monument, including burial mounds, smaller earthwork enclosures, and the network of ditches and banks that connect various features across the plain, it identified a set of geometric relationships between Stonehenge and several nearby burial mounds that had not previously been analyzed as a connected system. A cluster of round barrows several hundred meters to the southwest sit at distances and angles from a monument's center that form a consistent, repeatable ratio, one that shows up again in a second, unrelated cluster of barrows to the northeast. The odds of 2 independent groups of burial mounds, built at different times by what the archaeological record suggests were different generations, both landing on the same geometric ratio relative to the monument purely by chance, are low enough that the research team flagged it as worth dedicated field study rather than dismissing it as coincidence. What makes this harder to explain is the dating. Some of the earthwork features involved in this geometric relationship predate the earliest Sarsen construction by several centuries, meaning that whatever geometric logic connects them to the eventual stone circle was already present in the landscape before the stones themselves went up. Either the final layout of the Sarsen circle was deliberately positioned to match a geometric plan that already existed on the ground, or successive generations, working from oral instruction alone, kept extending a design according to a ratio none of them had personally established, across a time span long enough to include the earlier, ditch-only phase of the monument and the much later, fully realized stone circle we recognize today. Neither explanation is simple. Both require a form of continuity, either physical markers on the land that later builders deliberately measured against, or transmitted instruction precise enough to reproduce a specific numerical ratio without writing, that goes beyond what is usually assumed for communities in this period. The AI cannot tell us which explanation is correct, and it is worth being honest that this is exactly the kind of finding that needs verification through traditional excavation and independent replication before anyone treats it as settled. Pattern recognition across a dataset is a hypothesis generator, not proof, and the research team has said as much in every public statement about this work. That caution matters because the honest version of this story is less dramatic than the version that spreads easily online. The AI did not discover a lost alien technology. It did not find evidence of a civilization more advanced than our own hiding underneath a field in Wiltshire. What it found is a set of statistically unusual correlations across datasets that had never been examined together, correlations that suggest the people who began building Stonehenge understood their materials, their land, and possibly their acoustics with more precision than the simple farmers with antler picks version of the story usually allows for, and that this understanding was not perfectly preserved across the centuries it took to finish the project. That is still a significant finding, even without embellishment. It reframes Stonehenge not as a single act of communal effort executed at a consistent level of skill, but as a long, uneven relay, one that started with something close to genuine expertise and gradually became an act of cultural memory, a community continuing to follow a plan whose full logic they may no longer have entirely possessed. If that is true, then the closure of the monument around 1600 BC, when activity at the site largely stops, starts to look less like abandonment and more like an ending that had been coming for a long time, the final stage of a project that had been slowly losing its original meaning for centuries before anyone stopped adding to it. There is also a broader point buried in all of this that has less to do with Stonehenge specifically and more to do with what this kind of analysis represents. Archaeology has always been limited by the fact that individual researchers specialize. A geologist studies stone sourcing. An astronomer studies alignments. An acoustic engineer, on the rare occasions one gets involved, studies resonance. These specialists rarely read each other's papers closely enough to notice when their separate findings might describe the same underlying phenomenon from different angles. An AI system with access to all of it at once does not have that limitation. It does not care which department a dataset came from. That is genuinely new, and it is likely to matter far beyond this one monument because most major archaeological sites have the same problem. Decades of fragmented, single-discipline research sitting in separate archives, never cross-referenced at scale. What the Stonehenge analysis demonstrates, more than any single finding about tool marks or bluestone acoustics, is that this kind of integration is now possible, and that it produces testable hypotheses a purely human research process would likely never have generated, simply because no one person or team has the bandwidth to hold 3 centuries of scattered data in mind at once. The research team has been clear that the next step is not to publish these findings as conclusions, but to design targeted excavations and controlled acoustic testing specifically to confirm or rule out what the model surfaced. Some of it may not survive that scrutiny. Correlations found in large datasets sometimes evaporate under closer, more controlled examination, and the team has said they expect at least some of these patterns to turn out to be statistical artifacts rather than genuine evidence of ancient knowledge. But some of it may hold up, and if even the toolmark finding or the bluestone acoustic clustering survives independent verification, it would meaningfully change how we think about what Neolithic communities in Britain were capable of without requiring any explanation more exotic than a group of unusually skilled people whose knowledge outlived them imperfectly. That is, in the end, a very human story. Not a story about lost superscience or ancient visitors, but a story about how difficult it has always been to pass complete understanding from one generation to the next without writing to hold it steady, and how 5,000-year-old ring of stone on an English plain may be, among everything else it is, a record of exactly how that process unfolded, precise at the start and slowly, humanly, imperfect by the end. Stonehenge has never been short of theories. What has been short of until now is a way to test all of them against each other at once. Whether this new analysis marks the beginning of finally understanding the monument, or just the beginning of a more complicated set of questions than we had before, is something only further excavation will settle. For now, the stones are still standing exactly where they always were, and for the first time in a very long time, researchers have a genuinely new set of reasons to go back and look at them again.